Hello, everyone, and welcome to Screenwalks. I'm Marco De Mutis, digital curator at Photomuseum Winterthur in Switzerland. And together with John Uriarte at the Photographers Gallery in London, we have created this collaborative program of fortnightly live-streamed events. Through Screenwalks, we are interested in investigating the changing role of the photographic image in its networked and digital forms. Each event is led by an artist, a researcher, or a curator who accompanies the audience to the spaces where their core practice takes place. Screenwalks can be a live performance, a peek behind the scenes of an artwork, or a guided online tour among other possible formats. We ended 2023 with a fantastic performance by Chia Misola, and the artist has also live-streamed a new work titled A Bedroom in Las Piñas during the break. The recording is now on our Twitch and YouTube channel, so go and check it out if you have missed it. We have hosted now more than 70 Screenwalk events in total, and you can find video recordings of each one of them on our website and YouTube channel, all publicly accessible for free. You can browse through this archive through tags on screenwalks.com or through curated playlists on YouTube. Now, please remember that if you have found Screenwalks useful for your professional or personal interests, do consider subscribing to Folders. For only €7, you support the program and its artists, and also get your personalized folder on folders.screenwalks.com. There, you'll receive files and extra content from the artists and researchers of Screenwalks. Now, some housekeeping information. Your microphone should be muted to avoid noise disturbances. If it's still on, please mute it now. We are recording and will be archiving this event. Please use the public chat to ask questions, or feel free to send a private message to John or me. Finally, today's Screenwalk was made possible through the help of Matt at Web Curious, and we'd like to thank him for his help and for the incredible work he has been doing through his writing over the years. If you are not subscribed to his Web Curious newsletter, do it immediately. Do it now while John introduces tonight's events, and then come immediately back to follow the rest of the Screenwalk.
And hello and welcome back from my side too. I'm John Uriarte. I'm a curator of Screenwalks with the Photographers Gallery. I'm really happy to be back on this first Screenwalk of the 2024 season. Today we are going to start looking at many of the areas of the internet that stay on the sides of the dominating online ecosystems. Even if social media platforms seem to be the only internet spaces that the majority of people regularly scroll on, there's a wide and flourishing scene beyond those feeds. Poetic, crafted, experimental, small, playful, atmospheric, or weird are some of the adjectives we could use to describe the online places that we are going to be visiting today. Different corners of the network where the original practices and ideas behind the web remain alive and thriving. We will have Kristoffer Tjalve leading a behind-the-scenes tour of his diagram website, made of hundreds of links pointing to a rich diversity of online spaces. He will share with us the research that he has done over the years to gather all these websites and the development behind the diagram, reflecting on mapping as a practice to register, discover, and make sense of the internet. So get ready to enjoy performative website readings and hear improvised conversations with HTML poets, and also start thinking on any contribution that you might want to submit to complete the diagram. Kristoffer works to expand what the internet is and can be. He writes the Naive Weekly newsletter, which I also encourage you to subscribe if you haven't done that yet. And he also hosts the Naive yearly gatherings, which expand from the newsletter, and maintains Tiny Awards and many other internet real estates. Hello, Kristoffer. We are really happy and excited to have you with us today. The screen is yours.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen here. Desktop. Perfect. Do you see what's happening here? That's a yes. So this is my desktop. There's a photo of my girlfriend Anna and our son Uno. She's actually a real photographer, but I find it interesting that I'm the one sitting here in this photographic institution and presenting. Nevertheless, I'm very, very pleased to be here, and also for the the opportunity to sort of elaborate both on the internet, but specifically on this diagram that I made together with Elliot Cost. Just a little bit today's program. It's very straightforward. It's divided into 6 parts. We'll start with a little bit of background, touching upon both the newsletter, how that took me into sort of mapping the internet, looking into a few different internet maps. Then we're going to look through the stages, like the process of how the diagram came to be. We're going to go into a tour of the diagram where I intend of asking questions to people who are with us here in the chat. And then towards the end, we'll update the diagram before diving into some questions. And I have some secret information because, like, if you are watching, depends where you are watching. You can watch it live right now on Zoom, and then you have a little chat. And that one is a very secret field where no one else can see what's happening, but you can write with each other. And as was mentioned, it's very good to share some links to websites that you might consider to be included. Thank you. Let's start. Cool. So Naive Weekly, as mentioned, is a newsletter that I've been writing for the last 5.5 years. I started writing in the slipstream of the 2016 US election, so with a little bit of delay. But I very much focused on the conversation around critical technologies, questioning how technology influences our societies, our lives. And for the first many years, that was kind of the main focus of it. It was a weekly personal commitment to kind of reflect on what is the purpose of technology and what is the state of the world. It was still very much a personal container. I was doing projects work-wise that was related to these conversations, but I needed a space for myself to kind of make sense of what I was doing. And writing this newsletter really became a habit for me to kind of like contest what I found. I had a very critical focus on technology for the first 3 years. But at some point, I kind of started to feel that I repeated myself. There were notions around filter bubbles that I found couldn't really fully, I couldn't fully find a backup for the statements around filter bubbles. And at some point, I was like, okay, what am I actually looking for? Because at the same time, I had also unsubscribed myself from the more Silicon Valley notions of technology. So I was looking for sort of places that reflected the values from the internet that I myself really resonated with. And I, at some point during the pandemic, ended up on this website called Special Fish, which is the most beautiful social network site you can find. It has basically this whole mosaic with different colors, and then you can click in, and people sometimes write small profiles, different things. And this site was made by Elliot Cost, who I eventually ended up making the diagram website with. I came to Special Fish through the works of the Laurel Swolf, who I think is also here with us today. And I think together they kind of like showed me a way that the internet could be done from different intentions. So it was things that felt more heartfelt, things that felt more curious, things that was kind of not defined necessarily of being a productive platform, but something around how we relate to each other. And I think for the last 2-3 years, that has really been sort of the main engagement with the internet, because it really brought back a lot of the excitement that I felt when I first joined the internet. And from sort of the newsletter becoming a container for sort of these thinking around the internet, I realized it sort of like it started to become its own environment, and it also in many ways grew out of me myself. I started doing other sort of expanded projects that related to the newsletter, and these kind of gone in many different directions. We are talking today about the diagram.website. And last year I hosted a conference related to the topics of the newsletter. And together with Matt, who was mentioned in the introduction, we hosted Tiny Awards. It's a very small celebration of personal and playful websites on the internet. But yeah, I think generally speaking, the newsletter became really like a place for me to every week evolve myself into the internet, but also then started to search from the sites that I actually really wish that everyone knew about, and sites that I represented something poetic, something different from what I would see generally speaking. Today, I will just, before we go into the diagram, that website, I wanted to talk a little bit about internet maps. One of the things that I started doing, I think this I made first 3 years ago, which is a spreadsheet, where Google spreadsheet, designed as a map, and in between here, there are links hidden in some of the squares. And I started creating this as sort of as a response, because often I would hear this notion that the internet is boring or there's nothing cool out there. And at that time, I already felt that there are all these sites there that kind of still represent everything what people are requesting. And so I thought that I would create a map for people to find them. Still, as I would always say, I think discovery still is a personal quest and something that has to come from the inside. So I didn't want to kind of create a list with all of the things, but kind of make something that, in this case, imitate a Pokemon game where you can go and find Easter eggs. Obviously, this is far from the first internet map. Tiana, who does very heartfelt projects as well, and you should totally check out her work. For a few years ago, and around the same time as I did the spreadsheet, was invited by Laura again to do a workshop or a class around the internet map. And now this is loading a bit slow, but she made this, which is another internet map. This is Tiana's internet map. And here around you can find like, where is her studio, where's her friend's house, where's the cafe, where's the French studios. And these are linked here. And I kind of really found that this is it's very cute to kind of like find a different way to portray the internet. Of course, like websites have sitemaps, and of course you can do this in a much more efficient way. But I think for me, it really intrigues my interest, or like piques my interest when I see something like this, different like this. Tiana also kind of have the whole lecture online. So if you start on this URL, you will be able to kind of follow it through, where she also really reflects very personal about like the meaning of creating a map. I cannot speak for Tiana, but I can say for me, like creating a map is obviously also acknowledging that a mapping is not neutral, but it's a representation of reality, and it of course really matters from what perspective this map is, whether it's like driving commercial interactions or whoever this is. And this is another, I think, is a fairly well-known map. This is a map of Reddit. It's a space that is not represented on the diagram.website, website, but I mean, within these, you find so many different subreddits. Obviously, that's a fairly big one. I think I'm more into the maps that kind of indicates the different directions. Like Lee Olsen created this very, very beautiful and poetic map. It's more technical, I would say. So it's still very different from both the wilderness map that I did with all the different sites hidden in it, but also the diagram website. Here you kind of like basically start with the internet, and then you can kind of like go through. This is a diagram format, which is also very nice. And you can see, okay, there's different protocols. This relates to censorship, etc., etc. And you can kind of go through it. I think this is much like it's very relevant. It's probably more straightforward and more technical than I am. I'm not a developer, a designer, a coder. And so I think I approach the internet very much from a naive perspective, but also just engaging to it. I really, really deeply appreciate such diagrams. But I think for me, what I really also wanted to do with the diagram.website was to take it out of any sort of technical explanations and talk about the internet in languages that are different. Another very fairly well-known map that is always an inspiration for me is, and generally speaking, a very good blogger is Maggie Appleton, and she did this. Okay, it doesn't work. I cozy web. She made this nice drawing illustration of sort of like, where is the internet? This is made a few years ago, probably like very much reflected how I started thinking when I started writing a weekly. So you very much sort of have like the dark forest of the internet with like all the the big social media accounts, then you start to have this cozy web, the idea that everything is sort of like happening in gates, like in ways that is not accessible for everything. Speaking of this chat that we have here on our Zoom little place, of course, then you have the dark web. I think this is great, but I think like for me, what is really exciting is like this layer that is so small, like this, like the basically where the mycelium would grow, right? Like the digital gardens, the email newsletters, and that's really like that's the core. Like, and I was just like, oh, I don't want like so much space. Like this is taking a lot to kind of showcase everything that I'm tired of talking about, and I want to go deep into like sort of the layer that is, in my opinion, is the nutrition and reflects the open spirit of the web. Yeah, and I think one that I found recently, like it's like a little bit of an old school, like Jodi.org is like a legacy site, and I recently realized that they have this old map. I haven't checked out exactly when it was made, but a lot of the sites no longer work. So you get to like dead links or like people who took over the domains and kind of started to use it for different purposes, which is also very much part of the web. But I think had I been in a different time, I think all of this would kind of speak to me in the way that the diagrams.website speaks to me now. So like now when I see these are quite foreign, but obviously if you are into it, you will understand. And just to kind of like show the audience, just in case you don't know, it's a very much well established. Okay, there's always different things happening when I'm coming in here. So now you can see we are doing a little poem here up in the navigation bar. Who the fuck, you talking to me, you talking to me, you talking to me.com, and it kind of refreshes. Then who the hell else are you talking to.com, and it kind of goes. I didn't expect this when I checked out recently. I would get into a more classic Jodi site, still very difficult to understand. But basically, I think it's just one of those sites that just never really understand what's happening. I did see recently that there was an article on Freeze Art Mag about the project, but I don't want to read it because I think somehow it's nicer not to fully know and just to kind of see what's unfolding on the screen. Yeah, I think I would definitely like also, before we go into the diagrams.website, I would just really encourage people to make their own maps, because I think ultimately that is the best way to kind of take agency over how we discover things. Like obviously math becomes like a memory, it's like a way of how we found something, but I think as much, it's also really, as Yoko Ono writes in the Grapefruit book, it's a draw a map to get lost. I think it's really an ideal practice to kind of get somewhere else, because sometimes when you sketch out where you have already been, you very quickly realize where you have gaps to kind of explore. I have some legacy ones here. They're like all these icebergs, sort of like memes thing. Just gonna show it because now we are here. But you know, like I guess this visually or aesthetically kind of resembles more the diagrams.website, where you have all these different memes, which was a very big thing some years ago, and I still kind of enjoy it, and also because I don't really understand a lot of it. But I think it's still nice to make something that is just for so few people, and whatever sort of niche forum people are part of, that's what makes sense. There's obviously also Jerry's Brain, which I think is, I tried to load it earlier today, but my computer didn't allow me. But for anyone who is kind of into like knowledge management system, I feel like this is the original version of it and has been going on for so many years. Like Jerry, who has been indexing everything he's been reading and seeing how that relates to it. And I mean, I wasn't thinking about it, but I feel like there's definitely some aesthetic overlaps between the diagrams.websites and Jerry's Brain. So I cannot say one would exist without the other. And then the final one I want to show is just one that I just was shared with very recently. And I want to share it because I think this one is the first that I've seen that has been replicated from the diagram website. And this, I assume this is made in the same way because it feels like that. And also if you go into the mother site, you will find diagram website mentioned. So I assume there is some sort of inspiration. But basically, I really enjoy this, and I find it very, very interesting, both to kind of engage with how people classify things, but also then where people introduced Spencer, who just wrote lovely in the chat. He's here, for example. Wholesome, MF, that's not Spencer writing about himself, but that's Judah Loop writing about Spencer. And obviously there are other very fairly well-known names when you are in this call, I assume. Anyway, I think it's very nice to see that it's being taken on and that other people are replicating it in their own ways. Because I think it's just a really interesting interface to discover and expand the internet, and it goes much faster than or it's a good, I don't want to delete all search. That's great. Feeds are great, but it's a nice companion to add as well. But okay, let's go into a little bit behind the scenes of the diagram. It started actually as this basically Apple Note. Everything that I create is basically Apple Notes. That's how I organize my life. And it kind of, I think I started in around September. So I organized this conference in August, and it was very, very lovely. There were a lot of people came who was interested in the poetic web, the quiet art web. Call it what we want. I think it's also, there are many names to describe what it is. And there were some of these people who kind of asked me like, okay, how do you find these, or how do I engage with this? And I intentionally didn't really want to become a place for it, because I feel like there are all these existing initiatives existing. So I think it's much more interesting, okay, how can I find ways to guide people to those existing movements, communities, people, practitioners, artists, researchers, whatever, that are already doing really, really good work, rather than becoming a destination that kind of like has to be its own community and what's not. Yeah, so this was very much the start of the whole project, was just Google knows, as you can see at this point, I did start to kind of find peers. So I realized that it makes sense to talk about like dark forest and then digital gardens. They're related to each other, or there's the fair web and queer servers. Those are very much related to in thought. So I kind of did start already to kind of just put them into where I find them, or where I figured out I feel that they could be kins. But the list very quickly grew, and I was kind of, okay, this is becoming meaningless as a list, or like I don't know exactly what to do with it. And one of the people who were at the conference in the summer was Tom Critchlow, and through who I think was Patrick Tanguay's Sanchez newsletter. He had a nice little mention of this block map that Tom made. And Tom wrote a nice little guide how to do it in Figma. So this is basically just an SVG file that is exported and then embedded as inline HTML. And it was very step-by-step on how to recreate it. And as a non-developer, I'm very happy when something is so easily described, because it makes me feel that it's something I can do myself. And Figma, even though I'm not a designer either, I can move around a few text bubbles in Figma. So I was like, okay, maybe this could be interesting to replicate as a map or as a form. And then I started to, in Figma, start to draw. I knew that I wanted it to be more organic. I felt like this, I think Tom's is better for selling consultancy services, but that was not really my intention with this diagram. So I kind of like, I knew that I wanted a little bit more softer shapes. Yeah, so I started to just plot it in, just adding a few of these things to see how they could relate and where to place them. This was in September. Oh, I'm in the chat if you're writing. No, yeah, and then this next one, we kind of expanded. I think it was kind of on the same day. I just felt like, okay, I can add more. And I felt, okay, this is already taking a really nice shape. There are like clusters of things. There are no descriptions at this point, or like no classifications. At least I kept it very, I kept it just the classifications for myself, mainly because I didn't want to over-explain the map. I didn't want to kind of like enforce logic onto these sites, but I really wanted people to make it on their own as they kind of discovered it. But yeah, it kept growing, and I realized that this can become very big. And as it got big, I was like, okay, maybe I should try to introduce a little bit of classifications, a little bit of logic, because otherwise it's not going to be legible at all for anyone else. So this, at this point, I think this is in November, I kind of covered it to actually add some labels. And I think to an extent, this very much looks like the map as it became. I think, yeah, I think all the main sort of areas are there at this point, like the middle one, which is called personal at this stage. I later changed to idiosyncratic. But I think that's just like the main change. Otherwise, it's just a matter of volume. Because what happened as I was kind of still doing this, I just realized everything that I forgot. And then I was in this lucky situation that Elliot, who made Special That Fish and who spoke at the conference that I organized, he was coming to Athens together with Laura. And then I asked Elliot if he would be interested in helping me kind of make this happen in the end, both to make it into the website. I realized that most of my sites I make on card, and there when I embedded the SVT path into inline HTML, it would cut because I couldn't add so many lines of code. It's a very long SVT path. So I also realized that it's going to take me a bit longer to kind of make it real in development sense, but also I really appreciate Elia's style, and like, if you know, he has the Gossip Web, where like he does a lot of internet projects. Let's see here. But I like this like he has this handmade logo that like is on handmade sites. And I kind of like was a direction that I felt could be really nice, and especially like the color scheme he has on the blog. I think was something that like I was like, okay, this could be really, really cool. I actually, in that screenshot that I showed, I copied it, and I was like, okay, I should just ask Elliot if he should do this together, because he will make it more beautiful and more smooth. Yeah, so I asked Elliot, and then we worked on it together. We sketched out like the website as it pretty much became to be. These are Elliot's drawing. He's much more talented at these things, and kind of figured out how do we do it with the overlay of everything. Basically meaning that how do we make sure that the diagram kind of expand out of what we see, etc. How should it be able to interact with what else did I have here? Elliot showed me the very first prototype, and he kind of had made different filters. I will show them later for the diagram, and I really loved it. And yeah, and this is the last photo before going into the diagram, and it's just like I was Friday evening. There was an evening my time. I'm based in Greece, but you can see my room was a bit darker than the others. Yeah, there were some people on the internet organized something called an Explorer Club. So they basically organized a 2-hour session to go through the diagram, and they made this very, very cool spreadsheet. I will see if I have the link somewhere, where they made a spreadsheet for all of this things on the diagram, and you can tag it your own, and then you make your own little favorite. So you made your own spreadsheet from it. And I just joined in the beginning to say hi, but it was very touching. And the guy who made the spreadsheet was sitting down here with the yellow highlight is Andrew, who is created Your World of Text, which I didn't know. I mean, I know Your World of Text, but I didn't know that Andrew created it, and Andrew's side is actually on the diagram. And I think that was just a very little wholesome meeting before, like, or something that I totally didn't think would happen from this diagram. Okay, but I think now we come here. So I think here, what I would like to do is that I would like to kind of go through a little bit the map as it is, or the diagram as it is. And I would also like to talk a little bit about the classifications, even though that I think in reality, it's better when you make up your own mind and don't listen too much to what I'm saying. And then I would also really like to ask a few questions to some of the people who are in the audience and who actually created some of these sites that are here, because I think it's much more interesting also to ask them how they see themselves being both represented in this place, but also have them explain a little bit of what they have been doing. So let me just start. So basically, this is the diagram you saw. This is the Figma. This is an SVT that is exported. You can roll around. there are a few buttons down here in the like in the bottom of the site. And if you click random, I won't do that now, it will take you to a random of these sites. It can be any of them. And then you are kind of lost from the diagram. Here, this is evening. This is currently the filter that is on. And I mentioned that Elliot kind of made different representations of the map. And this is the called day. And then I think that the one that I found the coolest when I saw it was the silk screen. I think, of course, this is very overwhelming, but I think it carries a little bit the logic that I had in the beginning of it not being too legible. And I think this is the one where everything kind of blends together. We have another way to kind of avoid the problem of being told what to think by just you can click not info, but maybe it doesn't work here. Okay, there's a little, we can click off the layer so you can kind of take off these the line, like both the sort of like the titles, but also everything of how it belongs to where. I think this is in many ways a very nice way of engaging with it. But for sort of like this case, let's talk about the main areas. The reason why we started idiosyncratic or at earlier personal is because I think for me this that's the core of it. It's like for me this is still a personal project. This is the sites that I would kind of explore and find out. These are the things that catch my attention one way or another. So it's a very incomplete map. And I think starting with the internet as being incomplete or not necessarily having to be everything, for me that's how the internet quickly becomes much more enjoyable. And this doesn't have to be for everyone. But idiosyncratic also for me, and why I changed it from personal is because I think on an aesthetic point of view, I very much start to be drawn into projects that kind of just feels that they took whatever was in the quirks or any sort of like essence of a project and they just exaggerated it. So if you would if it would be in food, if you would have something that is very bitter, it would just be extremely bitter, or there would be nuances of bitter. Instead of trying to kind of assimilate for everything, you kind of start to kind of bring out certain aspects of projects or people or sites. And for me, it's really it's something that I'm very, very much drawn to these days, especially as I think the rise of generative tools are kind of expanding. I think this is something I just find myself, I'm very happy to be involved with. Idiosyncratic, of course, also kind of overlaps very naturally with small. Small has to do, of course, with the size. So things that are tiny, that doesn't take so much weight. You have this whole movements of different, 1 kilobyte club and etc. that kind of want to make their websites as small as possible. But I think small is also a philosophy, right? So it's for me, it's also about a way to sort of being able to oversee what's happening and not necessarily aim for scale, but make for something that can be managed within your own capabilities or the communities or the environment that you are part of. Idiosyncratic also sometimes for me overlaps very easily and very naturally with what a sort of independence. And I think that's it's of course quite a long tradition on the web design that to search for independence. There's the indie web, generally speaking, it's a narrative that is copied by pretty much anyone, both tech startups to researchers to whoever, basically the ability to make yourself published and understood and found, and also not rely on others. I think that comes, of course, also in the things that it can be isolated, so it can also be the interdependence. But for now, I kind of went with just independence, and there you have stuff like the indie web, of course. If we go into further a little bit into the independence, I feel like that also relates very much with the publish culture of the web. That's since forever, and it makes a lot of sense. The web is a tool for publishing. I think here there are some smaller overlaps that I kind of categorize for myself. We have these alternative search engines and the alternative browsers. And for me, this sort of this space that is here represents a lot about different way of discovery. How do you find things that is published outside of sort of the mainstream or the monopoles? And down here below, you have sort of like the distribution methods to kind of reach more people, where I think there are some very, very old and well-established tools like RSS that unfortunately is not super alive, but still is very much alive. And I know that there's still a very good niche that discover things there. I also put web rings here, and of course you could add many other things. I think internet maps could maybe be here. Then there is I added a category called multiplayer, and multiplayer is a little bit of I think it's a lack of a better term. I'm not sure that I'm fully into the multiplayer name, but it's related. I didn't want to call it social media. I think there are like the USCLA, they just launched a program or like a study called social software, or focus on social software. Maybe that's a better approach, but I went with multiplayer, and I think I did that primarily because still the interactiveness of the internet, and it's also a place to find peers or people who share niche interests. And I think there are a few examples around here. When it comes to the independence, the multiplayer kind of evolves into sort of like communities forms, the forms of the commons, etc., different protocols that require more people involved. Then on the top left, and I don't know if it is my schooling, but I'm reading from top left to right. So I think that the sort of the core or the essence or basically the pathway to everything that I found for me was sort of what I labeled here HTML. I'm not sure that that's the best name for it, because I think it's much more represent for me in this situation more sort of the poetic web or approaches to using HTML to create art. So you have the net art movements here. You have like folder poetry, URL poetry, you have the poetic web. You also have some more like established traditions like the e-literature, and more common or more contemporary ones like the HTML review that Martin Tjalve does so lovely. Now we'll just scroll a bit further. North of idiosyncratic, you have fun, and I think fun is also maybe not what I find is the best name for this category. And I think also it's very much like a blind spot to me, and it's like an area on this diagram that I feel like I need to explore more. It's basically like, of course it's games, but I would like to figure out what kind of games there are. I put in now indie games, but I think indie games is also sort of like, it's talking down everything that is happening on itch, and where people, or similar story, like places where people create very, very small handmade games that are just so different in the storytelling and the narrative. And to say that they necessarily need to be fun, that's also like limits a little bit that medium and that what it can do as sort of in terms of expression. Yeah, and then we have text that sites that very, or initiatives that are very committed to text as a form. And then I think down here we have a little triangle, and atmosphere is probably like the one that is like the most awake in terms of name, and I didn't really know how to express it, but there are like a lot of these initiatives like soft text, tender web, quiet web, calm text, slow web. I didn't really know exactly where to do it, because it's I think what they first and foremost is sort of like then the atmosphere of experiencing the web that they address, more than anything else. It's not necessarily a technical requirement, or it's not a bullet point, but it's like it's a feeling, and I try to capture that with atmosphere. And I then try to overlap myth with atmosphere, and I was not sure that I should do this, but for me it felt still right, because I think that there is like a really a need or search for different myths of like both technology, or especially the internet. I think we are told very, very well about how the web came to be, and also its sort of military roots. We also know its academic roots. But I think that's still that's one story, or it's like highlighting certain aspects. And this is not that they are not true, but I think that that should coexist other myths that root or situate the web in different sort of myths, so to speak. And here I put like the L Computer Histories, which is like a very lovely podcast that goes through very deep histories of what happened on the internet in different countries, because it was a parallel movement around the world. And I think in the end, it was very much an American and like CERN invention that we aimed up using, but it could as well as been others. I also put in here like computational history, and I think that's generally speaking also that to make the web not only legible but also easier for people who are not white male in their 30s to kind of engage with. It also creates that we need to make an atmosphere where the web feels different. I think that an environment also kind of fosters certain behaviors, and I think basically to create and to make it feel different, we will also end up having a different web. And then I think there's a bigger one here, ecology kind of, it encapsulates a lot, and of course it's very much the zeitgeist, not just on the internet, but throughout everything we do because of our man-made climate disaster. So we definitely do need to change some things, and that's also reflected on the internet, and it goes from the very sort of like the very straightforward observation that the internet uses electrons and like energy, and that is made from stones, and there is sort of nature in the computer and the internet, but then it also kind of expands out into sort of more the ecology and like how we relate with the others basically. So if you would study ecology, you would study the relationships and the interconnectedness of everything. And that is also happening on the internet, sites or projects that situates the internet in very different ways. And for me, that's also very important to sort of underline the need for or the requirements of a certain openness to kind of see that. So it's also when we suddenly talk about that everything is interconnected or connected and we all are part of each other, that is also kind of like we need to address ourselves to be open to see this. And I think that's something like Austin Smith writes beautiful about in Feral Web and the Queer Servers also. It's a beautiful text they wrote of sort of like the encompassing or like to allow for things that are not necessarily just ourselves. Okay, so this is a little bit the diagram as it is. There are a few more sort of like things like functions you can submit, you can read a little bit info, you can view the index, which is like basically a spreadsheet. It's not connected necessarily, but it's just a place where I've been writing it down in case you like a spreadsheet. You can also do the text as you want. And then I think just before we kind of maybe go into some of these conversations with the people, I think, or look into specific sites, I think that I just want to address that for me, this is still a representation that I made. It makes a lot of sense in my head, and I don't necessarily assume that that's true for you. I don't see that this should be the universal map of the internet. I would rather still emphasize that this is a internet map, and there should be many. It's also very incomplete in the sense that I keep finding things. I would keep expanding it, but I think the goal is not to make it have everything. I think this is like, for me, it's as much as a reminder to kind of keep exploring or even revisit things that are there, but that is maybe forgotten. And then I like also want to say that there are a lot of like sort of the placements that even when I look at it now, that maybe they actually don't make sense, or where I wish that I could represent it in a different form, but it is the 2D reflection of everything. Okay. If there are any specific questions, you can write them also in the chat. And I think otherwise that should actually be you should be able to unmute yourself. So Spencer, if you are here, could you unmute yourself?
Hello.
Hey, Spencer.
Hey, Kristoffer.
thanks for joining. Could you just tell us where you're based?
Sure, I'm based in San Francisco right now. It's very rainy outside currently.
Cool. And thank you. You knew that I was gonna ask you something, but you don't know exactly what I want to ask you about. But I think Spencer overlaps many of the areas in this map and has many projects that relates to many of the things. I think one project that is for sure represented is Tiny Internets, which I placed down here. And this is Spencer's project. And Spencer, could you like just explain a little bit what is Tiny Internets?
Yeah, I think first this term is sort of like a found word. I think I saw it somewhere like on Twitter, like 3 years ago, and it really like captured my imagination. And this project really started like 2.5 years ago, when I did a summer residency, and it was around basically investigating this feeling of overwhelming like nostalgia for an old internet where we shared more space together. And Tiny Internet just felt like just emerged as the best term to sort of encapsulate this, because it evokes sort of like a small neighborhood where you sort of know most of the people who are there, and you sort of it's like it's not meant to be scalable. It's sort of essentially inherently capable of being like fully comprehended and understood and sort of slowly uncovered. Yeah, this project was just exploring different ways of relating to each other on the internet, and has sort of evolved into my ongoing research practice in that space.
Very cool. You have leaves falling on your website. Like, is that a tiny?
That's right.
You have leaves like falling on this website. Is that a tiny internet element, or what characterizes a tiny internet in design sense, for example?
Yeah, I think the main piece that sort of like I would say matches the handmade aesthetic that I look for when I think about tiny internets. Like I want to feel that the website was made by a specific person, rather than like some nameless or like amorphous like entity. And I think the other part is that it sort of allows for a visitor to participate in the website somehow. And so like this website has like a form, like there's a link on there to a forum, and that sort of invites participation. I think other websites that I think about that feel like tiny internets in themselves, like Special Fish, for example, that's another great example. Something that where the space is actually actively evolving as people drop in and visit it. They're able to like leave their presence in the same way that if you visited your local cafe day after day, you would be able to do the same.
That's very nice. And I think since like you talk about sort of the interacting or people passing by, I think that also makes me think about Play HTML, which is also your project. It's a website, right? Yeah. Could you tell what is this?
Yeah. This is the latest I guess like approach to this question, and it's a library and it's infrastructure for live interactions on websites that persist over time. And so everything you're doing, I think you see other people's cursors, maybe people from the chat are arriving here. All of these interactions are happening for everyone on the same site. And so this is really my ongoing exploration into like, how can you make it so that people can make these shared spaces? Like how can websites truly feel like a communal space that you can actively shape over time?
It's very cool. I very much love the Play HTML projects, like just to everyone to see that there are these lamps and I can switch them on and off, and or I can switch them on and off. Other people interact with it, and it kind of like becomes a little bit annoying if you have a very clear aesthetic of how you want the page to look. But I think, as you say, it's also something that is only possible or meaningful when it's very tiny or it's very small, and maybe it's you would have a website and there's the lamp and you could see if someone has been by since last time you were there, or like these small ways of capturing that. I think it's very nice to see. Okay, Spencer, I will let you rest in the rain. And
Thank you, Kristoffer.
You're welcome. And then Spencer also write a newsletter. You can plug that somewhere. Spencer Chung, you can find him. .me, I think, is his website. So I want to ask if Jisoo is here. Jisoo. I was not fully sure because she wrote that they would be watching from South Korea, and that right now the time is 3-4 a.m. So it would be very late there. Hello.
Oh, do you see us?
Wait, I'll see if I can find a way to see you.
Hello.
Oh, hey, after new order. Very nice to see you. And impressive that you're sitting here and watching at 4 a.m. or soon 4 a.m. in the night.
4 a.m. here.
That's so crazy. Can you, I mean, this is the first time we talk, and I know of your work from the internet, which is absolutely amazing. But can you just explain me like who you are and what is After New Order?
What is After New Order? So we are a collective based in Seoul and Leipzig, and we make websites and what do we do? We just research what's happening on the web, and we make exhibitions and publications, websites. You can visit afterneworder.com to. Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
We will do. Is this the right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
And you
I
can
think,
see some. Sorry.
and we saw the alt museum from your map too, and that's our
Oh yeah,
project.
that's amazing. The Alt Text Museum. We'll show that. But I also want to see, like, so Jisoo we wrote because Jisoo's website is the best .xyz domain that I have seen yet, which is website site.xyz. And the websites are all very amazing. So I will let people kind of like browse on their own. But another project that Jisoo and After New Order is making is the white spreadsheet.online, which I assume is a course, right?
This is not my project, but this is a workshop that I'm organizing at my place. And yes, this is actually Sujin Kwon, the other designer's project.
So you organize it?
Yes, yes.
But you also have done a lot of spreadsheets yourself, right?
Yes, I did.
Oh, perfect. Can you tell me which one, for example? Because I'm messed up on there.
JISU dot world WORLD.
Can you write it in chat? Sorry, I'm a little bit dyslexia, so like words doesn't work so well for me. Yeah. amazing. And
So if you go,
can you, sorry?
if you go onto the tab Bird library,
Bird, yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and then minimize it to like no, not that way, but from the Google spreadsheet view only, next to view only, there's 100%.
Yeah.
No. 50, and you can see the bookshelf.
That's amazing. So this is all the books that you have in your library?
So the library is over here. You see it?
That's amazing. So you are showing the library in the back, and here's the spreadsheet. Can you like talk a bit about like why create a website with spreadsheets, or why did you use the spreadsheet for this project?
I always wanted to look up the books that I have, and I started listing up on the spreadsheet, but I didn't really like how it looks like a ledger book, and I wanted to be an image. So I just made a physical bookshelf out of spreadsheet, and that's like categorizing few books. Like it feels like I'm picking the books and then putting onto the other shelf. So each time.
Are you still here?
Yes.
Okay. So you're saying that you can move around the books, so how does that work?
Yes.
That's incredible. Yeah, no, I very much love and very inspired by how you broke down the spreadsheet from my business school years into something that is very different. Thank you for joining and for organizing the viewing session over there. And then I wanted to ask Gemma if Gemma could join with voice. See that she should be here. Oh.
Hey.
Hey, Gemma. So this is also the first time we talk, so I very use this to as an excuse to reach out to some of the internet people in the world. And Gemma has the advantage that her name kind of ends in a domain. So you have, so my son is called Uno, and I realized that actually it's a top level domain, which I think, like I didn't know that, but I should tell that that's why we picked it. But anyway, Gemma does a lot of amazing work. So maybe can you just introduce yourself, where you're based and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. At the moment, I'm based in Lisbon. I'm an Australian designer, and I'm part of a worker cooperative. So we're a group of 7 people kind of based around Europe, and we work with grassroots organizations on their kind of campaign strategy and building digital tools to kind of help them in their work, basically.
That's very cool. And I think like a lot of what I see you also research and explore is sort of like both common knowledge, but also like cooperatives. And I was wondering like if there are any examples of like how a website, and this is a very unfair question, but like how would a website be reflected if it's a common site? Like, so like, of course you can have a description of a website where it kind of like, we are collective, etc. But if that website should embody a collective or a commons, how would that look like? Or can you find any examples of such things?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's an obvious one because like half my site is taking Arena channels, but I think Arena is like the best example of like a commons. You know, obviously there's the kind of central team that are building it and maintaining it and everything like that. But I just think it's so beautiful how they've kind of like including with the way that they've designed it aesthetically, but also how the system works. Like it really is almost like an empty space, which the users can then kind of fill. And there's just really like this element of care, like the idea of commenting, you know, or like a commons, it's really important that it's a verb instead of just like a resource. Like commenting is something that you do kind of continuously. You need to spend time on it. You need to have a community. And so, yeah, I think Arena is a great example.
Yeah, I mean, Arena, I'm always happy to give a shout out. We can visit Arena just to everyone sees what this is. But it's how would you describe Arena, Gemma? Oh,
that's such a good
someone
question.
has been doing their homework here, so you can see that Gemma added something to her collection, which is called Bookshelf. And if someone doesn't know what a collection is or channel is, then it's Gemma's. How would you describe Bookshelf? Because it's actually your channel.
I was interested in websites that are showing books, but in a way that like brings a kind of tactility to it that either feels the same way that you get in a bookstore or feels like something different, like taking it to a new place in the digital realm, basically.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I think why I really wanted to talk about with you specifically is like, one is the comments, and I think there are still a lot of unknowns for me, like how do you actually maintain or keep certain website projects alive, especially sort of like more social software or social media sites that are not maybe built on imperatives that are very different, but at the same time doesn't lose relevance. And I think there's still, it's an open question. So if anyone in the chat has very good examples, I would be very curious to kind of see that, or maybe you have. But I think that's like, this is an area where I would like also like to explore more, like what is like the infrastructure that allows for these sites to kind of like still be alive, because a lot of the projects and the people here are putting this together in their off hours, or it's like purely made of love, or things that are just like dear to them. Special Fish has been mentioned a couple of times, and that's just Elliot that kind of does that when he has time to it. And I feel like maybe some sort of comments can also be an answer to kind of find ways to maintain these projects. But this is an open question and I don't have any answers. I don't expect you to have the answers for everything.
I mean, I feel like one of the things I really like about Elliot's work is the simplicity and directness. Like, I think that there's a direct link there with maintenance. I think so much of the internet and social media and everything, like obviously it's opaque, it's owned by other people, and it's so complicated to make a modern website. Whereas, yeah, like all the examples that you've shown, they're accessible. You can actually learn how to do it if you're just doing it in your free time. So yeah, I think it's important.
Cool. Thank you, Gemma. I think I will kind of like, I promised that I will show how to update this project. But I feel also like the time is running out a little bit. So maybe I will like, not that it's running out, we have more time, but I've been talking a lot of time. So I would maybe ask Jon and Marco to ask for questions while I kind of will show how to update it. So I know you have a little spiel about people sending questions or something like that.
Yeah, just let me first thank you for like all the websites and everything that you have shared. It's been also amazing to hear every people like people from very different places joining, and there were some comments already on the chat saying about how wonderful, how great, how amazing this scheme was. It's been. There's already a question from Catherine that I wanted to bring to you. It says, I was wondering, Kristoffer, do you know if there are any sites like you've mentioned, diagram, which specifically speak to a younger audience, to kids?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know of any. Like I was asking, I think Linda, she was with us at some point, but she had to leave. Linda Lucas wrote Hello Ruby and other things, doing a lot of work and sort of like bringing very similar philosophies to introducing kids to technology. And I was actually asking around that, I was asking her specifically, and she introduced me to the concept of unplugged computing, which I think kind of lead it in one way. It's like the idea of like thinking about the computer in a different sense. And I think that's one area. I haven't found a map, so to speak, but I will show you some routes, and otherwise, like anything Linda has done, it's always amazing. This is Linda, she's been doing a lot of like teaching kids technology and stuff, and maybe you should talk with her to make a map specifically.
I'm jumping in before you explain a little bit how to update, also to thank you from my side, and especially, I mean, also wanted to thank you for including Screenworks in this website. It's an honor for us to be part of the diagram. And especially because I think it's very important, just coming in again from the photography point of view, given that, our institutions, both the Photographers Gallery and the Photo Museum of Winterthur are photography institutions. I think this is a particularly important also discussion to have when we talk about social medias and these alternative forms and accessibilities of the web. Like images and image ecologies and media exchanges very much trapped in many of the social media platforms that we talked about. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell a little bit about specifically like examples that you could show about like images, alternative spaces in which images can exist. Of course, these are like also larger infrastructures that also can host image exchange and communities that also deal with that. And I understand that that's maybe more like a selfish interest in dealing with this specificity. But I was just wondering if you noticed something that you could share that has to do more with digital and network images.
I'm not like, it's very relevant. My first question would be, since you call it like, it would be to return with a question, right? You call this Screenwalks, which I kind of assume is a play on a photo walk. And then that relates to sort of like the main problem that I have with the internet is actually like how to photograph it or how to mediate it or how to represent it, because it's so web-based, or it's so in the browser and on your computer and on your phone or whatever. And I really struggle with sort of like, how do you capture that in an essence? Like, because it is not the same when you just take a screenshot and show that this is the website, right? And I think this is, I know this is not necessarily what you asked for, but I think this is something that I've definitely been thinking, and like I spoke with Elliot about it when he was here, because he had on the blog, I think he does this very, very nicely. You see it here where you see people photographed with like the websites are photographed in the space and the location, right? So you have here like the website is placed in the office. You have, I think it should be Maya, like who did a screen walk. And I think like that also relates to be a little bit of like, maybe I think Maya is a good example to explain like sort of to actually address the question that you raised of like how to display photos and images. I'm sure that there are 100% amazing forums and stuff like that. You should totally go into those, like niche forum, like it's alive and well. Use search.edo or whatever domains that you get into the right places. But I would say like what Maya also shows is like just the importance of giving a name to your work, right? So I think that pretty much each of her works gets their own domain name, which is like read it and weep dot, forgot the last, whichever top level domain she's using for that. But basically all of them then actually gets a website, and the website becomes a destination in itself. And I would encourage anyone to do that, right? And I think that's in the end of the day, then how do you show it? Like you could use the spreadsheet, right? You can have your work displayed in this way. And I think for me, that would be much more interesting than any other approach. Because I think it's a way in the end that you can control the environment of how it is displayed. You control how it's linked to others. And then I would encourage people to build the infrastructures, right? Like the web rings, etc. And Tumblr is still alive and well. Yeah.
Thanks. Oops. Thanks.
Sorry, no, while I will wait for more questions, I was also wondering if you think that there's certain like increase on people doing these attempts of mapping the internet or mapping maybe even corners of the internet right now in some sort of like a backlash of like the social media dominance of the internet, like trying to go beyond that and try to find all these spaces to like both archive them, sort of keep them and also map them somehow, or I
think you're kind of like giving up a serve, right? Like I'm like yes, but I'm also like I'm part of the running team, right? Like so, like this is what I engage myself with. So even my other social feeds are now full of people making websites and thinking about the internet in different ways. So I feel very much that it's a changing, but I do also feel like it ties very well into a wider like zeitgeist or like a wider, more mainstream audience. You have like Kale Charka's Fill the World that was just published and has been doing the book tours, other reviews in all major newspapers, right? So I think it is like to say that it's a niche conversation, sort of like the tiredness or like how we are shaped by the platforms we use on the internet, that's for sure. But I also feel like people looking for a different sort of optimism around the internet that is not the like I think it has been presented by Silicon Valley for a long time, but I think that's also a little bit, I feel like people realize you can still be optimistic and in love with the internet without having to build $1 billion unicorn startup. You can actually still really appreciate the internet as a tool to publish and connect and find peers. So I would say yes, and I think that it's a very exciting times, because I think when I started writing or focusing on this, I would sometimes struggle to fill a weekly edition, and now I feel like every week I could have written 5 editions, and I will end up writing as long as Matt does his Web Curious if I wanted to, and because I feel it's so much, right? Which is, so from my perspective, it's a clear yes. People are hungry for something handmade and quirky and etc.
Yeah, maybe like the follow-up question will be, and what's going to be the effect of like some companies who are trying to already like sort of corporatize the mapping? I guess that
for sure. And they should, right? I don't think that's a problem. I also think it will evolve, right? Like, so the expressions and etc. will constantly evolve, right? Like, I think the internet is a medium that can be used for creative expressions. It always will be done, and whether there are like certain sort of like copyrights that does it, that it will be, the aesthetics will change, right? Because as soon as someone does that, then the people with their hands dirty, they will be elsewhere. And I think that's sort of like the nature of how this works. And so I'm not worried, and I think ultimately I would encourage it. And I also don't want to be bashing too hard on like the big tech companies that do things like we sit on a well-functioning video call. I have done nice website with spreadsheets, right? I think it is pretty cool what's available and how accessible it is. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks. Also, I also wanted to thank Jem, Afternoon, the Spencer, all the people who connected also from all these different parts of the globe. It's fantastic also to being, hearing voices from all of these different parts of the world, the different time zones. We also appreciate you staying up in the middle of the night. We just got a question from Megan. Such an interesting reflection about the difficulty photographing the internet. Do you find that describing the internet presents any similar/different challenges? Curious about your experience. Smiley face.
Yes, for sure. I think that the words does what the photo does, right? And I think like in the end of the day, like how we can, I think the words that is used to describe the internet is like, I think is changing a lot, but I do find that it's a challenge. I myself try to lean into sort of very personal writing, because I feel like that centers it in my experience and how I relate to it. But I do think that there are also other ways. Megan is a good writer. There's been other good writers here today, who kind of like are able to put it to like put the websites, like explain them in different senses, that maybe it's not just it has a blue button, but actually it kind of like goes a little bit beyond that. And I think that is something I myself am very working on, but I find very difficult. Yeah.
Marco,
You're muted, whoever is.
It was a brilliant question. So no, I was just thinking now, hearing you talking about this. It's something I've been thinking about also in terms of like the different experiences we've had in Screenworks. We've seen artists either working with different tools like, you know, HTML language, JavaScript, all these codes in artistic ways. And then we've seen people sort of like hijacking spaces that come from, you know, Silicon Valley tech. Like we've seen the spreadsheets library now. We've had people taking over a Miro board, doing a gigantic collective digital collage in a live stream. So I was wondering, like, how do you see these two seemingly competing, but also maybe complementary technique? You know, one seems to be going to look at more like the languages in which the code is made, and is kind of using them as the tools for like a artistic or creative or poetic intervention. And the other one seems to be more like a misuse, or there's something of a counter strategy, maybe. I don't know. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, mine would be like, I wouldn't want necessarily to limit either. I think I include both in here. It's clear that its tendency to prioritize more like the use of code in poetic ways. I think that's like the main representation, but I do also like Sam Levine, Tika Brain have done amazing work in this field, right? Like Wi-Fi hacking, digital sabotage, which I find amazing still, right? So I don't want to, for me, that's still extremely relevant. I think I think my biggest hope, generally speaking, is though to find things that doesn't talk in opposition, but actually kind of finds ways outside of that. And that's where I sometimes like limit a little bit more the very clear criticisms of both big tech, but also sort of the sabotage of it, because it's such a straight attack on it, and it can be relevant in many ways. But I would just, my biggest hope is just for a language to flourish that is somehow independent on its own, so the sort of can be fully freed. But I think that's very, very difficult. Yeah.
Thanks.
I was also wondering, how did you start organizing the Naive yearly? Or like, what was like the reason behind it? Because I mean, I find it also interesting to like that moment of suddenly meeting the people that I guess that you only interacted through internet until then, and how that experience is.
I think it came to many ways still as a personal ambition, because like last year I was mainly taking care of my son. We relocated to Athens and we took him out of institutions in Denmark, and then Anna, my girlfriend, has been taking a lot of care of him in Denmark where we lived before, and then I felt she really she deserved her time to also use her other abilities in the different settings. So I was very happy to be with our son Uno. And then I also knew that I wanted to have something to occupy me with. And the timing felt very nice to do a gathering, to bring people together. I think from these people that I'm writing about or including here, being complete strangers, they are now to some extent internet acquaintances. And I felt that it would be really nice to actually meet up in a space, because as much as I love formats like this, I think it is very, very different. The atmosphere, the feeling you get when you're in the same space. And then I also wanted to take these people that I find are amazing artists and actually put them on a stage and have the spotlight on them and make people sit and listen. And for me, that was really in the end, it was a very beautiful day. It was like one day at the National Film School of Denmark. There were 8 speakers, and Laura, who is here and who I deeply admire, she was giving the final talk. And I think it became very touching to sort of see like people that I feel like should just deserve the full stage, could have the full stage. So that was the motivation, and yeah, we'll see if it will happen again.
Yeah, hopefully we can join the next one too. I guess that maybe now we've been already, like we asked you to, and you shared a lot of information. You've been really generous.
That's what we do here now. We kidnapped our guest actually for a very selfish personal Q&A.
Please do.
I was wondering, maybe like on a final note, did we already say how people could contribute to the growing of the diagram? So there's a submit button, right?
Yeah, but just send it to me probably is better. Like it's a spreadsheet. I realized that a lot of it was featured different places on the internet, and I got a lot of let's say people wanting their own projects to be there. And it's not that people should not do it, but it's just more like not necessarily the deepest. There are some very nice submissions. There's this Nautica, which is a Spanish-speaking HTML energy project, so to speak, which is very lovely. I'm happy that they submitted it, and ashamed that I forgot it. But just send it to me somewhere, email probably. I promise to have a close look. Yeah.
Fantastic. Please do not forget to submit links.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, yes, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you. It felt some sort of like a screen work within a screen work with all these guys. So it was really nice. Really, I mean, I'm really thankful for all the work that you've presented. It's been a super nice evening.
Yes, thank you also from my side. Thanks for everybody who joined. We're back in 2 weeks with Sanya Teas talking about conspiracy theories and generative AI platforms.
Yeah, it's gonna be a big change of topic from today, but we hope
the conspiracy theory look with the diagram. No,
yeah, we invite you all to come again in 2 weeks. And once again, yeah, everyone who joined, thank you so much, and particularly Kristoffer, thank you so much for your screen work.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Yeah, also feel free if you want to. You are able now to unmute your microphones if you want to say goodbye. And yeah.